Making the book you actually want in publishing can be difficult. There are so many challenges. How do you negotiate with the editor and the marketing team? And then after all that, how do you still want to write another book? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Kristin Donnelly, and today I'm here with Andrea Nguyen. Hey, Andrea.
Hey, Kristin.
So I'm excited for our guest today.
Yes, I've been looking forward to talking to the one and only
Rick Martínez.
Rick Martínez.
His second book has just come out called Salsa Daddy. I think it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, Rick has a unique voice, but he's also firmly rooted in cookbook making and recipe development, but he does it at his own speed and his own level. And Salsa Daddy really got me, excited to talk with him today.
Yeah. And his first book, Mi Cocina, is also very beautiful, personal, but different in that it's more of a survey. And this is a single subject, but it's a single subject where the guardrails are off, maybe like it's a little more, even more playful. So I'm really curious about how it was working on that book, but also with the publisher on that book, and if there were expectations that were a little bit different.
Totally. Because we've talked so much on the show here about what you want to produce in a book, your vision, and then how there are oftentimes obstacles.
Mm-hmm. The copy editor. No.
Copy editor, I know. Yeah, you wake up in the middle of the night, copy editor, your editor, marketing team, the designer, photographer, budget. We can go on and on and on, listeners. But I want to know how he's been able to negotiate that.
Yeah. And then also, of course, being a Mexican-American cookbook author writing about Mexican food, how has that changed even since he first started?
Most definitely.
All right, let's bring on Rick. Hey, Rick, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you for having me.
We've been waiting for such a long time, Rick.
Yeah, since your last book.
Glad I have a new one to talk about this time, although I do still love Mi Cocina a lot.
We do too.
And before we even get into this new book, Salsa Daddy, we wanted to start with a bigger question. You spoke to Matt Rodbard for the Taste podcast back in 2022 after your first book, Mi Cocina, came out. And you said, I believe Americans love Mexican food, but their palate and repertoire is limited by the awareness of food in Mexico. Everyone makes the same 5 dishes over and over again: tacos, enchiladas, burritos, nachos, and quesadillas. And Andrew and I were wondering, since then, do you think anything has changed? And what is the state of Mexican cooking and cookbooks in America?
Ooh, that's a big question. So much has changed. It's actually, to me, it's sort of mind-boggling, actually, how much the universe has changed in the 3 years. From a food perspective, I think horizons have been broadened. I think back then, we Mexican Americans and people in food media worried about respecting tradition, respecting culture, origins. We chased things like authenticity, and that was sort of set as what you as a person of color should aspire to in writing your recipes or, in looking at culture, whether it's yours or someone else's. That was sort of the bar that was set. Now, I think a lot of this is driven by social media and influencers. I think that all of those notions 3 years ago of chasing this ideal are gone. And what people chase now are followers, likes, recognition, celebrity, and I'll speak only really for Mexican-American influencers that I watch carefully. I think there's and as we know, Mexican-Americans in the United States have shifted rightward. Not necessarily as a result of that, but one of the other parts of that is the move in food as well. There are a lot more similarities now in Mexican-American cuisine to general population, white, right-leaning folks. So there's a lot more processed food. There's a lot more mixes. There's a lot more really easy food that you take the shortcuts, you take the packets, you take the jarred salsas, you take the sauces, pre-cut things, pre-ground mixtures of meat or other veggies, lots of cream cheese, lots of cheese, And so there might be a nod or an acknowledgement that this has like some cultural or heritage tie to something, but no one seems concerned about it anymore. It's like, I'm going to throw in 3 cans of things and a block of cream cheese in a blender, and that's going to be a salsa. And then we're done. And I get 1 million views. And if I swap out the jarred jalapenos, pickled jalapenos for pickles, like just dill pickles, that's going to get me even more. I am sadly not making that up.
Oh my God.
So I think that is the big difference now between when I wrote Mi Cocina and the world that we lived in, then. It's shocking to me how different things are. But I also feel like within salsa, I believe that there is still that same kind of box that existed in Mexican food when I wrote Mi Cocina. People are aware of red salsa, green salsa, salsa matcha, maybe, and guacamole. And that's kind of it. You may know that you can char some, you may know that you can cook some, but for the most part, it's just those things. Part of the reason why I wanted to write this book, I love it. I love salsa. I also think that it is such a foundational element within the cuisine, but also with the same set of goals that I had with Mi Cocina, I wanted to broaden people's perspective of what this sauce means in Mexico and what it can do. And frankly, a lot of that I learned while I was writing the book. This book completely changed the way that I cook. The cook that I was when I started the book is different than I am today. And that change is more significant, I think, than it was when I wrote Mi Cocina.
Let's back up a little bit. You said some very important macro level things. I mean, that rightward shift in the Mexican-American population. We saw that during the presidential elections in 2024. And that must have been something that was an undercurrent for some time, this move towards hardcore mainstreaming of the cuisine.
Yes.
At the same time, there is this very anti-immigrant, xenophobic sentiment moving around. And we see the border crossings, halt practically to a trickle, if not just stop altogether. And people still go to Chili's. They still go to, the Latino markets. I was just in Nashville and there were these guys grilling on Sunday afternoons on the sidewalk.
People wear their MAGA hats to Mexico. So there's that.
Yeah. So, I mean, what do you see as your role in this discourse?
Well, sadly, I think it's the same as it was before. I mean, I wrote Mi Cocina during Trump won. At that point, people were in cages on the border. There was still the same anti-immigrant rhetoric. Certainly the first round was much different than it is right now, but the sentiment was still there. I think probably the biggest difference is then I think there were less Hispanic or Mexican Americans as a part of that group. I think now the MAGA base is much larger and broader, and includes, bizarrely, immigrants, legal immigrants, and people of color. So there's that. My goals for the first book are very similar to the ones in the second book. What I saw as my job, or the job that I had accepted for myself with Mi Cocina, was in an atmosphere where everything about Mexico and Mexicans and the culture and the people was negative. There was a resounding sentiment of get out, keep them out, lock them out, remove them. My job, I felt, was to show the Mexico that I see, which is about beauty, the beauty of the country, the geography, the food, the people, the generosity, the architecture, the history, the fusion of different cultures. This cuisine and this country are comprised of city-states, of people from different places. So there were not only the indigenous cultures that were here, but then waves and waves of immigration, conquerors, whatever you want to call them. Each group left their mark. Each group stayed to some extent and formed a culture. And that's what this country is now. I wanted Mi Cocina, and then following that, every recipe that I wrote, every article that I wrote was about projecting the good that I see and that I love. In all honesty, when I pitched this book, Salsa Daddy, and this was before Biden dropped out, I thought there's probably a pretty good chance that he's going to win again, Trump. And I wanted this book to come out before Cinco de Mayo, 2025. And so I thought, okay, well, by then we will have had 4.5 months of Trump 2. And this book needs to almost over-project happiness and joy and comfort and togetherness. And so part of what I wanted, I have a firm belief that nobody except me makes salsa for one. You make it for a group, you make it for a party, for an event, for a Taco Tuesday with your family. But like, it's always about making it for something or some group of people. And so I wanted the book to be a pregame to that. The same goal as before, like, okay, so broaden the horizon of what salsa is, but probably more importantly, and this wasn't necessarily about showing the culture of Mexico, because a lot of these recipes are just things that I invented. And so I wanted to kind of break down these rules that people had in their head about like, this is the way that you make a green salsa. This is the way you make a red salsa. And then just like, fuck all of that. I'm going to give you guides, but then experiment and play and use what you have, use what's in season, use what, you can find. Don't spend that extra money that you probably now don't have. That was the intent of this book. That's why it looks the way it does. And that's why it reads the way it does. I want you to have as much fun reading and making these salsas as you do at the actual party when you're eating them.
Yeah, it's so vibrant. The language, the design, the photography.
Thank you.
You said this book changed your cooking. Tell us a little bit about that.
I did not expect this at all. When I wrote Mi Cocina, those recipes were an acknowledgement, an homage, a love letter to the food that I had eaten, in different places. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to adequately represent the food that I ate and the cook that made it, but also inject a little of my personal sazon, but also understand and recognize the fact, the limitations that exist in an Iowa grocery store. That was hard. Those were like, it was basically, every recipe was sort of like a little puzzle that I had to put together. To me, it was more of a math equation than it was like any sort of, creativity. I mean, there were places where I got creative, but I also kind of thought, is this too far? And at that time, I was worried about how people would react to a little bit too much sazon. With this book, I was like, well, fuck it. First of all, after having lived here 4 years now, 5, I feel like I now think like a Mexican cook. In the same way that I think living in Texas or, people in Louisiana or places in the United States where you are surrounded by a particular type of cuisine, the markets are filled with products and produce to make that particular type of cuisine. After a certain point, you don't have to think about it as much anymore, right? You know what flavors go together. You know what's available in certain seasons. You can start to cook from the seasons with that same kind of style and sazon. And then that's what happened to me here. So when I started writing Salsa Daddy, it was a lot easier because I know how to make salsa. I'm good at it. Like I see flavors in my mind and I know how they interact and they play. I think of food generally melodically. And so every bite to me is like a little refrain, a musical refrain that has highs and lows. There's some sort of beat that carries through. And my job is to like tune that for each recipe. So, I went in pretty confident. This is how I'm going to do it. And, I made my list of recipes for each chapter and then I would just attack it. And then probably like the beginning or middle of week 2, my refrigerator was full of quarts of salsa. I had probably about 13. My neighbors were like, no, back off, go away. We are not accepting any more salsa from you. I literally had no room in the fridge for anything else. And so like any other ingredients. And so I decided, I'm like, I can't throw any of this away. I need to do something with this. And so the first thing that I made, and it was literally just, I'm not going to think about it. I don't have time to make dinner, but I need something to eat and I need to use the salsa. I just bought a couple of pounds of ground beef and I mixed in 3 cups of random salsa, squished it together, threw it on a sheet tray and made meatloaf. And I was like, there, done. So I didn't really think anything of it. I was just like, I just need sustenance. And I was like, wow, this is really insane. This is a lot better than I would have expected, right? For so little thought, so little effort, so little emotional investment in this. This was purely a get rid of this salsa in my fridge. And also that I mixed salsas together and they somehow just worked. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to keep going. And so then, I started using them as braises. I started using them as soup bases. I started using them with pastas, with rice, as glazes, as marinades. Every time I did something, it was delicious. And again, so little effort, so little thought. It was I was not spending any time or effort thinking about what I was doing. It was just sort of like, well, it worked in a meatloaf. Let's, see what happens with a meatball. Let's see what happens with the chicken. And then I was talking to a friend of mine and she was like, you need to include some of these things. This is meal prep. This is Mexican meal prep. And the more I thought about it, I was like, wow, this actually is super cool. This actually is almost more important than the recipes themselves. Like just the idea of having in your freezer at any given moment, 4 cups of salsa, in little containers randomly. You add 3 cups of water and now you have a soup base. And you don't have to chop anything, prep anything. All you have to do is throw in whatever it is that you want in the soup, chicken, noodles, cut veg, whatever. But that's it. That's all. You're done. It was really, really remarkable. And so then I started, that kind of opened up this creativity to do more. And that's how the last chapter was born. And then, another area, I had one day, there was a cucumber. And so it was just in the crisper drawer getting soft. And I was like, okay, I want to know if I can make a salsa with a cucumber as the base. I have no idea if it's going to work or be gross or what, but we were going to try it. I was like, this is really remarkable because, in the same way that spa water, has that really refreshing kind of cooling effect, you can make a really powerfully spicy salsa, and the cucumber just tames it and kind of it just sort of lulls you into thinking that your mouth isn't on fire.
I remember that recipe when I was reading through it, and it worked, and it totally makes sense. It's like a raita sort of.
Yeah. It's also a very Mexican thing to do, right? You don't go to the store unless your refrigerator is empty. You've used every last little scrap of everything. And thankfully, that was at the very beginning of the process of developing recipes. And after that, I was just like, you know what? This is exactly what I want people to do when they read this book. One of the things that had inspired me, and I've been living here for 5 years, I've been to a lot of parties. There is a hierarchy that exists in at least the families that I've witnessed for cooking, right? So it starts with the eldest, so grandma. If she decides that she's going to make tamales, nobody else can make tamales. If your aunts and your mom decide they're going to make the rice, the beans, the guisos, you can't make those dishes. So by the time you get down to the people in their 20s and teens or younger, there's nothing left. For a lot of these kids, they don't have equipment. I mean, they're living at home, so they're kind of relegated to this corner of the kitchen while mom is doing whatever she's doing. So they make salsa. And what is really interesting to me is that it's a low investment, low effort. You don't need a lot of experience. You can be 11 years old and you've eaten everybody in the family salsa. You've been to lots of taquerias. You've tasted all of these different salsas. You don't have any sort of limitations about what you can do. You just throw things in a blender and maybe you fry them. Maybe you cut some things, and it's like... The potential for the reward is recognition, having the entire family like your salsa better than anybody else. That is a strong motivator for this type of cooking. And it happens in so many different families. It's incredible to me that this mentality exists in Mexico with younger people and more broadly, older people too, but whereas in the United States, people are just red salsa, green salsa.
Right. They're boxed into their binary, as you described in the book, this binary notion of what a salsa is versus seeing it in a kaleidoscopic manner, which is what your experience in Mexico. There is this very international quality, if not transnational quality about Salsa Daddy that I really loved. You talked about this kind of mashing up cultures that's happening to Mexican American cuisine. But and you present that, but in a very clever manner in Salsa Daddy. And so Chris and I were very taken with the way that the book is organized. Most of them are one-page recipes because we want the 11-year-olds to make them.
Exactly.
I have like a salsa cookbook, and they're mostly like photos of the ingredients in the salsas or the salsas themselves. That just gets kind of boring. You did something else where you showed repeatedly and a lot of it, like the applications, the ideas. I'm thinking of the albondigas sandwich, which is based on the torta. You show ramen, you show Vietnamese gỏi cuống, rice paper rolls. You got a salsa, put it on whatever you want. When did you make that leap to doing like this more like global thing? Salsa's for everybody, and I'm Salsa Daddy.
Part of it is just me. And I don't think that I really fully appreciated or understood this until I actually moved to Mexico. But in the beginning, when I first got here, I was very well aware of the fact that, I grew up in Texas. I lived in New York for 20 years. I've traveled to a lot of places all over the world. I had also, traveled to every state in Mexico. All of those experiences and my pursuit of food has been the same since I was little, right? It's like I seek out the best of, right? And so like when I moved to New York, this is in 2001, I would go find the best pasta, the best Queen Amman, the best croissants, the best Italian lobster tails. That's just what I did. I wanted to find the best thing so that I could just, when I was craving that thing, I would just go there. When I would go to Paris, when I've been to Sri Lanka, Trinidad, I did the same thing. I did the same thing in Mexico. And I also love talking to cooks, and I love cooking with families. And like I've cooked with, my friends, aunties at their weddings, because I love food and I love learning. And it's just like always a part of me. So like that, I just carry with me at all times. And when I taste something, normally what happens, or when I taste a salsa, this would go great with blank. That's kind of how my mind works. And sometimes it's a taco, sometimes it's a Mexican dish, and then sometimes it's not. The Alfredo Rojo, I had no intention, no thought at all about what ended up happening. But the second I tasted that salsa, I was like, I want this on penne with grilled chicken. Like that's what I want. And that's why it's named that, because it just literally tasted like a spicy red Alfredo sauce. The photos, luckily I didn't have to fight that much with the publisher, because I told them in the beginning, like, I want carte blanche. I'm not going through Mi Cocina again. I want complete creative control. And so they were very good about that. But one thing that they did very early on, because I told them, I was like, everybody knows what to do with a salsa. You're going to put it on a taco. The end. So we don't need to see that many tacos, if any. And I am not going to show bowls. I will allow maybe up to like 5 bowls in this book. But for the most part, I'm going to show this food on things that you would never imagine putting a salsa on. And then, like I got the emails like, oh my God, if you put it on a hamburger, what if people think it's a hamburger book? And I'm like, well, you're an idiot, because salsa is going to be in the title. I mean, like, how are you going to go 75 pages in and think, oh my God, this is a sandwich book? So that ended that. So that was fine.
With Mi Cocina, there was more pushback on the photography.
Not necessarily the style. The note that I got on day 8.
Oh.
Yeah. By someone who I asked off my book after this comment was, there are too many bright colors, there are too many circles, and all your food is looking the same.
Yikes.
We need more neutral tones. And I was like,
do you know who I am?
Yes. What makes you think that, A, there are any neutral tones in this country? And what about my personality suggests that I am a neutral toned person? So that I just called my agent and said, get this lady off my book. That was the reason why when I talked to Potter about book 2, I was like, I'm not going through that again.
Yeah, we're going loud.
Because I also believe that, like when I was writing the first book, they wanted what was successful in like in 2020 and 2021. Oh. Right. So like just really muted tones and, very textural, thick paper and, matte finish and very undersaturated.
Very aspirational.
Exactly. I was like, absolutely not. So anyway, book 2, and to their credit, we invented a whole new process for getting this book done. It was remarkably easy. And also the fact that I started Salsa Daddy on January 8th, 2024.
Oh my gosh. Whoa.
What?
That was the first recipe that I developed.
Whoa.
And we were shooting in May. We finished the design in September, and then we printed in December. And now here we are.
Oh my gosh. Did you sleep?
What is this process? It's not that much smaller than Mi Cocina.
No. And I mean, it was supposed to be smaller. And then when I turned in the manuscript and we dropped in all the photos, it was actually longer. I think it was 320. For the price point, they were like, we need to get it down. And so we had to cut a lot, or I had to cut a lot. It was a shocking experience because I wasn't expecting. I mean, also Mi Cocina, there was the research involved and the traveling and then the pandemic and then all the issues internally with them. And so it was, years. I started that book in 19. It was published in 22. And to be honest, I swore I would never do it again. I was like, I'm going to be the one-hit wonder. I'm not going to write another book. That's it. And then, and here we are.
The first Mi Cocina, you were solo, and then here you had a collaborator, Alex, work with you?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that. You also wrote a manuscript in 3 months?
I mean, it was a lot easier because there were not essays. I mean, the majority of this book are recipes, and they're simple recipes, right? I think I was doing 4 recipes a day. The recipes themselves were easier. I didn't have to agonize over them the way that I did with Mi Cocina. And also I got to have fun with them that I didn't have the first time around. So a good example of that is the salsa tejana, which is the peach and pecan one. That is very definitely an ode to my father and his peach trees and his pecan trees. And I remember thinking, this is either going to be really, really amazing or really horrible. And it worked. Alex and I had worked together at BA. She was a big salsa fan of mine. Pretty much any salsas that I made at BA, she just loved, and she would write about them. And I miss working with good editors, someone that you can sit with. So Alex, Hillary Cadigan, Meryl, these were people that I could pitch an idea to, and we could talk structure, we could talk language, format, length, the recipes attached to them, the sequence. They could make sense of what was in my head and make the work better. And it felt very collaborative. With Mi Cocina, I felt like I was only getting notes on, Walmart's not going to like that. Target's not going to like your profanity. Walmart's not going to like the Spanish words in the method of the recipes. So we need to take those out. And I was just like, you literally have no comment on the idea or the substance of this book. These are marketing notes, not anything else. And so I decided that part of my list of demands was, you're going to give me creative freedom, but I'm also going to hire someone that can make my work better and that I can throw ideas at, can spitball, we can decide on organization. Because that was organizing Salsa Daddy was really important to me, and I wasn't quite sure. And I went through a lot of different iterations, although ironically, the inspiration for both books, the organization of both books, was 6 Seasons. I adore that book so much. I love Josh, and I have a promo copy that I got. It doesn't even have a hard cover. It's a soft cover, no page numbers. And I got that when I was working at BA. When I was trying to figure out how to organize Mi Cocina, I wasn't going to do it seasonally, but that's kind of why not regionally? That seems to be a good idea. A regional Mexican cookbook and then organize it by regions. And then the same thing for this one, should I do it by ingredient or by what you should put it on or by the amount of time it takes or, there were just a lot of different ways. And in the end, I decided I wanted it to be about the way that you prepare it so that it's much more cook focused. If you have 5 minutes and that's it, go to the blender section and then just throw shit in the blender and boom, you're done. If you have a little bit more time, then maybe you can char some things or fry some things and smash them. If you're making something that's a little bit soft and you want a little more textural element, then you can chop it and add some chicharrones or some nuts or seeds and get a little bit more crunch. Part of this was also, Mi Cocina I knew was going to be a little bit more an advanced or an intermediate level cooking experience cook. I wanted more of an entry level. So like you said, I mean, these are like 1-page recipes for the 11-year-old that doesn't know how to cook, or if you have a knife or a blender or a rock, you can make these salsas in one bowl. And then we'll graduate you up. Because one of the other things that I find so fascinating is that these little kids or 20-somethings or 30-somethings are making these salsas, and then they get all this praise, and all of a sudden they're like, I can do this, right? Like, I made a salsa that grandma loves. I'm going to make something even more interesting. I'm going to push myself and make something, like the 2.0 version of this. I thought, okay, so we'll structure the book in the same way. So you have the chopped, the smashed, and the blended. And then, once you get good at those and you develop your confidence, let's move into the cooked salsas, right? And so then, and I open that with like the easy mole, the mole sencillo. I believe generally in recipe writing that you can either convince someone to learn a new technique or to try a new technique that they are unfamiliar with, or you can use new ingredients, but you can't do both at the same time. And whichever one you decide to do, then everything else has to be ridiculously simple. So I wanted to teach the techniques of how to make a mole, but using 10 ingredients and things that you could just find at the grocery store. So nothing fancy, nothing crazy. Just like get a tomato and a piece of chocolate and, like a dried chili, and then go to town. And if you can do that, then you can make a 54 ingredient mole. It's exactly the same process. It's just more stuff. And so to me, it was just like everything was sort of building and crescendoing into the last chapter, which again, I didn't want to be complicated. Mexican dishes. So, I like this idea of easy Mexican, weeknight style meals.
But your mother's chile colorado is in there.
Yes.
I was so happy.
I know. Ironically, it's never been published.
Yeah, I was wondering, where has this recipe been all my life?
It's in a very weird prose form. Back in 2015, BA used to have this thing cook without a recipe. And so you just basically wrote a story and then you put 3 chili anchos and, a pinch of that into this and whatever. And people made it. They've been making it for, a decade now. And I was like, you know what? I need to actually publish this recipe. So it's in there. It's not even really an easy weeknight meal because it does take a little bit longer than an hour. But I was like, I don't care. It's my book. Fuck it.
No, it's very sweetly written, the head note for you coming home from college. And, I can smell the Colorado's cooking. Your use of language in Mi Cocina really struck me. And I've mentioned it before on Everything Cookbooks. I just love the way you integrate Spanish into your writing, and there's no apologies.
That was a fight.
That was a fight, yeah.
Yeah, because there's no parentheses.
But this time, was it less of a fight?
It wasn't even a comment. That was a big deal. That was the first edit I got back on the manuscript. Pretty much everything had been changed. From the beginning, I had said, Mi Cocina is a teaching book, right? I'm going to introduce you to things that you've never seen or heard of. And so my assumption going in was if I explain the ingredient in the cook's note or in the head note, and it exists in the ingredient deck, and I also give substitutions if you can't find it or you don't want to use it, then everything should be fine, right? You know what it is. I've adequately explained it. I've told you what the translation is if there is one. But oftentimes they're just proper names. And then why wouldn't I say that you can, toast a tolera on both sides and, brush it with salsa guajillo or whatever, and then I got the first edit back and it was all of the toleras were changed to roll and tortillas were changed to flatbread.
No, stop.
You go to the grocery store, there's a bolillo and there's a telera. Where are these people living? Is that from the copy editor?
It was my editor.
Oh my.
I think that's a change in general with editing right now.
Yeah.
At least in my experience, they're deferring a lot more to the author now with those choices.
I stopped when I couldn't even finish reading the edit. I was so angry, and also just like at a personal level, like the context. I don't exactly remember the date, but this was like 21. So this is probably this was George Floyd era.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I think had it been 2019, I would have swallowed it and then just, like written some like, well, I appreciate your edits and how thoughtful they are. I think this. But because of the time that we were living in at that moment, I wrote back something pretty harsh and was like, I am not doing this. And I'm happy to take this up with whomever and show these edits to whomever. I think for a day or two, I was just sitting with it and it was just like eating my insides, and I know you know what that's like, and at that point we're on the verge of a changing universe, but like what I had been doing professionally and in my life for my entire, existence was you bite your lip and you're just like, yes, thank you. I will do what you say and get this byline and, or whatever. And then I was just like, no, fuck you. I'm not going to take this. We are going to keep all of the language that I have in there. Fuck you. That is the reason that I wanted my own editor moving into book 2, because I was like, this is the level of edit that I was getting. And also, like, I specifically requested Francis on book 2. I like him. I think he's good. And we were able to, like, back and forth some ideas. But I also wanted someone like Alex that we're friends. We've worked together for a decade. And it was just easier.
Yeah.
I think when you're used to that, like, magazine environment, that, like, collaborative magazine environment, going to books is very strange. The editing's so much lighter, more hands off, and they defer to you so much. And I'm like, I need, I need a little back and forth here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for book 1, there was no deference at all. It was like, this is the way that we do it. Like, you don't know anything. You're a first time editor. Here's how the process goes.
Awful.
Oh, man.
And also, like, I mean, I've written so much for the New York Times, and like, I love Emily and Genevieve and Kristin and like all of those people that, like, even if you never spoke to them and all you got was the edit, like, their intent is to make your writing the best that it can be. And they do things magically that I would have never thought of, that I'm like, oh, wow, you completely reorganized this, but my God, it makes it so much better, right? And to go from that to this other thing, it's shocking. And so I was like, I can't, it would have been so much more laborious without Alex there. And I want to work with her on book 3, and we have already started talking about that.
Nice. So do you have something in the works?
Yes.
Exciting. I wanted to ask a little bit about the photography, not just the style, just logistics. You have all these salsas, you want to show a dish for each thing, but then you don't necessarily always have a recipe for that thing. So, like, how did the shoot work?
It was completely collaborative. So everyone, with the exception of the prop stylist and the assistant and her assistant, were people I'd worked with in the past. So, like, Caroline was a food stylist. Jessica was her assistant. They styled the food in Micosina. Chris Cristiano was my designer for Micosina, and like, he's just so stupidly talented. Chris is, again, another person from my BA time, and I loved him then. And like, everything that we worked on, like the big spreads, the big stories that I did for BA, like, he just so lovingly and beautifully designed them. And, I loved Micosina, but like, the design of this book is, to me, mind-blowing. Like, it so represents me at a given moment. And it was very definitely me of 2024, probably to some extent still now. And I'm sure I will look back when I've written book 3 and think, wow, that was me. That was a good snapshot of me then, and I'm different now. And so hopefully book 3 will represent that new me. So he's very good at that, like kind of assessing where I am as a human being. And he also knows I'm a maximalist. And so that's what we're going to design to. And then the photographer, Alex, and I worked together. We were like, well, he was a little boy. I was younger.
We all were. It's okay.
Yeah. I mean, he was like, I think he was like 22, maybe 21. I don't know. He was like an intern when we met at BA. Nobody cared about him and they didn't really care about me. So they stuck us together and like we were literally shooting for the web, which they also didn't care about back then, in like a closet, literally. The great thing was is we could do whatever we wanted because Adam Rappaport didn't give a shit about the website, you know, and nobody was looking at it back then either. So we just like, we shot what we liked. I cooked what I wanted and got it approved. And then we like styled it and shot it. And so it was just fun. And I'd wanted to work with him on Mi Cocina, but he was doing a lot of cookbooks at that time. So we couldn't. And then I asked him about book 2 and it was like this really cool reunion. Like we got to have a lot of fun. He's so incredibly talented and he's probably one of the fastest photographers I've ever worked with. I told him this several times. I was like, it's amazing. Like I can give you the most complicated shot, right? Like I want this at this angle and this type of light, you know, with this color palette. And he would stand there and he'd like look and you could just see the wheels turning and he would move the C-stands and change the lighting and then like change the angle on his camera and he would get it. The perfect shot, you know, and there were a couple of times that it was more difficult, which I laughed at because I was like, good, you've got to earn your pay.
What's a difficult one in the book?
There's a pulled pork sandwich that uses ribs. So the original shot, I wanted ribs, like a rack of ribs that, you know, was like very glazy. We just couldn't get it to look like ribs are just so hard to shoot.
They're flat.
Yeah. We spent so much time trying to get that shot and everybody was getting like I could, you know, I was reading the room. I knew people were getting tired and we still had a lot to go. And so I was like, okay, we need sliced white sandwich bread. We're going to do like a very classic barbecue sandwich. And we're going to use the same pork, just take it off the bone, toss it in the sauce. And I love that shot. I love that shot. And I think it's much more telegraphic than my original idea about the ribs. And it's much more appetizing too, right? Like you can just see the meat and the sauce and then like you know what it should taste like, right? The best unctuous rib sandwich. To me, because I knew everybody except for the profiles who I adore.
Is she based in Mexico?
No. I flew everybody down.
Wow. So just like the sourcing for that.
It was probably like 40, 60. I wanted the majority of things that we used Mexican made. I gave her a list of like my favorite ceramicists in the country. For Mi Cocina, all of the props in that book I purchased when I was traveling around. And so like they were all handmade. They were a little more rustic and less colorful. For this one, I wanted a slightly more modern feel and then the plates themselves to carry a lot of the color. Her assistant, Sam is his name, I rented the house next door to me, it's an abandoned house. That was basically our workshop. They built all of the backdrops and the surfaces. So I bought like a bunch of like plywood, cut them in pieces. I also bought like a plaster and different things to texture and then lots of paints. And so every surface that's in the book is like handmade as well.
Wow.
We would just use those. And then so Sophia would like choose the color. We'd see the food from Caroline and then like build. At the end of every night, we would meet to talk about the next day. And so I had kind of a running thought list there was the shot list and I would write in what I thought about each, you know, how I wanted each shot and what it should be made on. I would open it up like, if you have other ideas for what this is or what it should be made on, let's do it. And part of it was motivated by what we wanted to eat, honestly. And then It was just like having fun. Anybody could, you know, we were taking suggestions from anybody and it was super collaborative. And I think that contributed to not only the diversity of the shots in the book, but also just like the fun.
The shoot looks so fun.
Could you have done that shoot in the United States? Because it sounds very expensive.
Oh, I don't know if I could do anything in the U.S. anymore. Like I'm continually shocked at like how expensive things are.
Yeah.
Probably not. But also like, I don't think I would have wanted to, even if I had like a big pot of gold, I was really concerned about where I was going to shoot this. And I had thought that I was going to have to rent something in Brooklyn or LA. And that was sort of the plan going into it. And then, thankfully, Mi Cocina continues, after now 3 years, it continues to do so well, which is to me just mind-blowing because I just assumed, like a lot of books, you get your first year and then it just, fades into oblivion. I'm obsessed with like the rankings on Amazon. And so like I was looking this morning and Salsa Daddy is number 1 on the Mexican cookbooks on Amazon and Mi Cocina was number 8.
Wow.
That's really awesome.
You cornered the category killer.
But my agent called me in January. So this was like right after I started working on Salsa Daddy. I had gone on like a pretty crazy book tour in the fall of 23. I have to pay for my own travel. Part of it was, all right, I want to know if this is paying out, like if this is an investment worth doing. Because I knew that like every time I was on the Today Show or like Seth Meyers or something like that, I sold a lot of books. But if I'm having to shell out thousands of dollars for travel and hotel, then, should I do it? So she calls me and says, guess what? We are getting a big check. I'm like, yes. So I took that big check and I called my designers. So like I hadn't finished the top floor of this house. The idea of the second floor of this house was always a production kitchen. So it was a place with a lot of space, a lot of light, soundproofed windows, a lot of electrical outlets everywhere so that I could shoot videos, big, video productions, and also shoot another book. So I called my designers and said, okay, all the plans, everything was like done. I just didn't have the money to make it. And I was like, all right, how soon can we finish this? Because I'm planning a shoot in May. So I need a finished second floor by May 1st. And they were like, all right, we're on it. My assistant who lives in Guadalajara came to Mazatlan and I was like, you need to project manage the construction. I'm going to write recipes. So that's part of our agreement. Like you're going to help me eat salsa and manage the construction. And so that's what happened. Like I finished the second floor of the house while I was writing. And literally the plumber and the painters were there the day before Caroline and Jessica landed to start shopping for food.
Wow.
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 Yeah. That's incredible timing.
Yeah. The great thing about it was sort of it was a party atmosphere, right? Like, I mean, I don't know if you've seen pictures of the upstairs, but it's like, there's a jacuzzi and there's a terrace and, and like it's a fun space to be in with a lot of room, and also for me, like I designed that thing with architects like 2-3 years before, trying to take into account like having a big production team, having all the C-stands and a place for the book and, all that kind of stuff. And it worked. That was also very gratifying as well. But I also think it changed the tenor of the book because it was very personal. And I think that's why it's such a strong reflection of me at that moment, because it was freshly painted. The cement was drying. The paint was drying. It was a bunch of kids like in a brand new playground.
Well,
Yeah.
It feels that way when you look through it. There's like this joy and this kind of like,
Exactly.
quality.
Yes.
You got the twinkle in your eye when you're sitting in that jacuzzi with the dog.
Yes. Exactly.
I noticed that.
We talked so much about what you did differently on this book, but I'm curious, anything going into your next project that you think you definitely will do or definitely won't do again?
I feel like Salsa Daddy was a really good, fine-tuning exercise. There's not a lot of changes that I want to make moving forward. And certainly with the way that I was able to work with the publisher this time around, and again, I can't go on about how gracious they were. Like they literally changed the production process for me. It was so easy to just affect change and make, beforehand, it just seemed, 1950s, right? It's like, you mark up a paper copy and you send it back and then they send you this. And then it's like, no, just give me the file. Let me go and let me copy edit. It's just going to be so much easier for everyone. I'm going to work with Chris again. I'm going to work with Alex Beggs again. For the creative team, I'm not certain because I do like switching photographers. It changes so much about the book. I haven't really thought that much about it, to be honest. And I also don't know what I want the photography to be in the third book. I feel like the process was so smooth with this one. And the great thing about that, now that like everything is just sort of all the unpleasantness has just been washed away, it just lets me have the opportunity to think about what I want to create. Having that freedom to just sit in front of my computer and just like dream about like, what are the recipes going to be like? What am I teaching people? What am I showing people? What is it going to look like? That's fun. That's the fun part about it. I want to have a regular cadence with books.
Get on that Andrea cadence.
Yes.
Oh, no,
3 years.
no. I gotta slow down. I'm in midlife, you guys. I love, Rick, how your focus is always on teaching. That's what we hope to do, is to share information with people and everything cookbooks. And you've shared so much with us today.
It's been such a pleasure. Obviously, I can talk about this forever.
Thank you so much for being here, and congratulations again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to today's show. If you have a question, a comment, or a guest suggestion, contact us at everythingcookbooks.com. We rely on listener support, and here are some ways to help. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and leave us a 5-star review. Order books mentioned on the show through our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Shop our t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other great merch, or buy us a round of coffee. Find us on Substack at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Reach out about advertising on the show or become a sponsor. Thank you to our editor, Abby Sarcatella. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.